Girl paid $5 for injured German Shepherd. But what the dog did next left her in tears. Emily was a 17-year-old girl who lived in a peaceful, small town nestled in the heart of Oregon. Life there followed a gentle rhythm. Everyone knew everyone, neighbors greeted each other by name, and the smell of freshly baked bread often drifted through the streets from Mrs. Harper's bakery on the corner. Emily had grown up surrounded by nature, spending her days wandering the fields, helping at her mother's flower shop, and dreaming of her future. Her greatest passion had always been animals. Since childhood, she had nurtured the dream of one day becoming a veterinarian, dedicating her life to caring for creatures big and small. It was a bright Saturday morning when everything began. The local flea market was bustling with activity. Vendors displayed everything from old books and antique lamps to handmade crafts and garden tools. The air carried a mixture of scents, freshly popped kettle corn, blooming flowers, and the occasional waft of grilled sausages from a nearby food cart. Emily strolled leisurely between the stalls, holding a paper cup filled with lemonade. She was not looking for anything in particular, just enjoying the simple pleasure of wandering and observing. Her gaze drifted from hand-painted ceramic bowls to knitted scarves, then to a table cluttered with vintage postcards. She was about to move on when something, or rather, someone, caught her eye. In the far corner of the market, partially shaded beneath a worn canvas tent, sat a man in his late 60s. His wrinkled face was framed by a bushy gray beard, and his weathered hands rested on a cane. Beside him, tethered loosely to the leg of his folding chair, was a German Shepherd. But not just any German Shepherd. This dog looked utterly defeated. His fur was matted, patches of dirt clung to his coat, and a thin scar traced just above his left eye. His ears drooped, and his once strong frame was noticeably frail. Emily slowed her steps, her heart giving a tiny ache at the sight. No one else seemed to notice. People walked past, some giving a fleeting glance but moving on without a second thought. The man adjusted his cap and leaned down to scratch behind the dog's ear. "Poor thing," Emily heard someone mutter nearby. "Like too much trouble. But I wouldn't take on a dog like that. Looks." Emily ignored the comment, drawn closer by something she could not explain. As she approached, the dog slowly lifted his head. His eyes, deep, intelligent, yet clouded with sadness, met hers. There was a pleading in them, not desperate but hopeful, as if he recognized a kindred spirit. Is he yours?" Emily asked softly, addressing the man. The old man sighed and nodded. "Interested. For now. Trying to find him a home. $5, if you're." $5? Emily echoed, surprised. "Yep. Just 5. Not trying to make money. Just hoping someone'll take care of him better than I can." She knelt beside the dog, carefully extending a hand. He flinched slightly but did not pull away. Instead, he sniffed her fingers, then rested his chin on her palm, as if surrendering to the moment. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long story," the man replied. "Found him wandering the outskirts of town 'bout a month ago. Tried feed in him, but, well, I ain't got the means. He needs someone young, someone who can give him the time and care he deserves." Emily's mind raced. She had not planned to adopt a dog. Her parents had always been supportive of her love for animals, but taking in a dog, especially one in such poor condition, was another matter entirely. Still, as she looked into those soulful eyes, something stirred within her. A quiet, undeniable certainty. Does he have a name? She asked. The man shook his head. If he does, I don't know it. Never answered to anything I tried. Emily bit her lip, glancing back toward the main stretch of the market where families laughed. And vendors shouted playful bargains. 1,000 thoughts flooded her mind. What would her parents say? Could they afford the vet bills? What if the dog was seriously ill? But beneath all the doubts was an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She could not leave him there. Not like this. Slowly, she reached into her backpack and pulled out her wallet. She counted out 5 $1 bills, her fingers trembling slightly. Handing them to the man, she took a deep breath. I'll take him. The man gave her a nod, his eyes softening. And maybe his life. Thank ya, miss. I reckon you just made his day. With cautious hands, Emily untied the thin rope from the chair and wrapped it around her wrist. As a makeshift leash. The German Shepherd stood, his legs a little wobbly, but he followed her. Without resistance. Each step seemed to carry both uncertainty and hope, as if he, too, understood that his life had just taken a sudden turn. As they walked away from the market together, Emily glanced down at her new companion. Guess we'll figure this out. She murmured. Both of us. She had no idea then how true those words would become. This unexpected encounter was only the beginning of a journey that would change not just her life, but the lives of many others. In ways she could never have imagined. Emily walked slowly down the gravel path leading away from the flea market, her hand gently holding the frayed rope tied around the German Shepherd's neck. Each step was careful, deliberate, as though both of them were unsure whether this decision was truly happening. The dog walked close to her side, his head lowered, ears pinned back slightly, tail not tucked but hanging low, reflecting a combination of exhaustion and uncertainty. As they moved farther from the crowd, Emily noticed just how thin he was. His ribs were subtly visible beneath his scruffy fur, and his paws were rough and cracked, probably from wandering aimlessly for weeks or even months. His gait was stiff, favoring his right hind leg ever so slightly. She made a mental note that a visit to the vet was not optional but urgent. Passing by familiar houses, Emily caught glances from neighbors tending to their gardens or washing their cars. Some gave polite nods, others frowned subtly, likely wondering where this bedraggled animal had come from. But no one asked, and Emily was thankful for that. Her heart was pounding, not from fear of the dog but from what awaited her at home. Her parents were understanding, but this was a big step. The dog stopped briefly near a bush, sniffed cautiously, then resumed walking without making a mess. His manners, even in his weakened state, struck Emily as unusual for a stray. This was not a wild, aggressive, or untrained dog. There was something disciplined about him, something structured that lingered beneath his exhaustion. Reaching her front gate, Emily paused, looking at the familiar white house with its blue shutters. And the small garden her mother lovingly maintained. The dog sat quietly beside her, as though waiting for instructions. She knelt, looked into his eyes again, and whispered, "Let's do this." Pushing the gate open, they walked up the path together. As she expected, the front door flew open before she even touched the knob. Her mother, hands still damp from washing dishes, stood frozen at the doorway, staring first at Emily, then at the dog. "Emily, what is this?" her mother asked, blinking in disbelief. "Mom, please, let me explain." Emily began quickly. I found him at the flea market." "Well, not exactly found. A man was giving him away. He's in bad shape. He needs help. I couldn't just I couldn't leave him. Her mother stepped forward, examining the dog with cautious eyes but not moving too close. Emily, look at him. He's hurt. And we don't even know if he's healthy. Or if he has an owner somewhere. I know. Emily said, her voice trembling. But he was going to be left there. No one wanted him. $5. That's all. No one even asked about him. The dog remained seated, glancing between Emily and her mother, showing no signs of aggression. His calmness worked in his favor, softening her mother's worried expression. Though it did not erase it. Her father appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel, and took in the scene in silence for a moment before speaking. Emily, sweetheart, we need to talk about this. I'll take care of him. Emily insisted before he could say more. I'll pay for his food, for the vet. I'll clean up after him. Please, just let him stay tonight. If it doesn't work out, I'll figure something out. But he has nowhere else. Her parents exchanged glances, an entire conversation passing silently between them in that brief look. Her father sighed and nodded toward the porch. All right. One night. But he stays outside until we know he's healthy. Tomorrow, the vet. No discussions. Relief washed over Emily like a wave. Thank you. Thank you so much. She led the dog around to the backyard, where an old wooden shed provided shelter. Grabbing an old blanket from the garage, she laid it down for him. He sniffed it cautiously, circled twice. Then lowered himself onto it, sighing deeply as though grateful for the simple comfort. Inside the house, her parents continued their quiet conversation, but Emily's focus remained entirely on her new companion. She brought him a bowl of water, which he drank slowly but gratefully, and a small plate with leftover chicken and rice. He ate, but carefully, as though not used to regular meals. While he ate, Emily sat cross-legged nearby, watching every movement. She mused quietly. The dog lifted his head at her voice, ears twitching slightly. Figure that out later. You need a name. But I guess we'll. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the yard, Emily's younger brother, Nathan, peeked out the back door. Is that a wolf? He asked, half serious, half intrigued. No. Emily chuckled. Just a very tired German shepherd. Nathan stepped closer, careful not to startle the dog. He looks sad. Yeah. Emily agreed softly. But not for long. That night, Emily barely slept. Every sound from the backyard pulled her from her pillow. Once, she crept out to check on him and found him curled tightly, his breathing slow but steady. She knelt beside him, gently brushing a hand along his back. His fur was coarse and dusty but warm beneath her fingers. You're safe now, she whispered, not sure if she was saying it more for him or for herself. Morning came with the chirping of birds and the smell of pancakes wafting from the kitchen. Emily was already up, tending to the dog. Her parents had agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to drive them to the local veterinary clinic first thing. As they loaded into the family car, her father driving, Emily sitting in the back seat with the dog beside her, she noticed something remarkable. Despite clearly not knowing them well, the dog behaved impeccably. He climbed into the car when guided, sat quietly, and looked out the window with an air of both curiosity and caution. Not once did he bark, whimper, or try to jump out. It was as though he understood that this ride was something important. When they arrived at the small clinic nestled near the town square, the receptionist greeted them kindly, casting a curious glance at the German shepherd. Oh my, he's Well, he's seen better days, hasn't he? The vet, Dr. Ramirez, was a middle-aged woman with gentle hands and a soothing voice. She crouched to the dog's level, letting him sniff her before proceeding. "You're a handsome fellow," she murmured. "A little rough around the edges, but we can work with that." As she began the examination, Emily watched closely. Dr. Ramirez checked his teeth, his eyes, his paws, palpated his sides, and noted the scar over his left eye. She scanned for a microchip, but shook her head. "No chip," she said. "At least not one easily detectable. But we'll do a deeper scan later." "Right. Now, I can tell you this, he's malnourished but not beyond recovery. Minor infections in the ears. Probably from being outdoors too long. The limp is likely from an old injury, not recent. I'd guess he's somewhere between 5 and 7 years old." Emily felt a mixture of relief and concern. Is he going to be okay? With proper care, food, and some rest, absolutely. Dr. Ramirez smiled. Been through something, but he's still holding on. He's tough. You can. Emily reached forward, stroking the dog's neck. His eyes closed briefly, leaning into the comfort. After the checkup, vaccinations, and scheduling a follow-up, they returned home with a small bag of antibiotics and instructions for care. Her father was quieter during the drive back. Thoughtful. Her mother, too, seemed less apprehensive now that they had a clearer picture of the dog's health. Later that afternoon, while Emily sat in the backyard watching him doze in the sunlight, she found herself smiling for the first time in days. He was no longer just a dog nobody wanted. He was hers. Or maybe, she thought, they belonged to each other now. The sun was barely rising over the hills when Emily woke, her heart already beating fast with anticipation. The previous day still felt like a surreal dream. She tiptoed toward her bedroom window, peeking outside. There he was, lying comfortably on the patch of grass near the old wooden shed, his head resting between his front paws, eyes half open, as if he, too, was unsure whether this new chapter in his life was truly real. The bond between them had started forming faster than Emily could have imagined. Every time she stepped outside, the German shepherd's eyes followed her, his ears perking up at the sound of her voice. Despite the clear exhaustion and malnourishment, his demeanor was calm, intelligent, and gentle. There was something special about him, something that went beyond the ordinary. Downstairs, her parents were already at the kitchen table, discussing the situation in hushed tones. Her mother stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, while her father flipped through the local newspaper without really reading it. Emily knew the conversation would not be easy. She walked in, trying to appear composed, but the flutter in her chest betrayed her nervousness. Her mother was the first to speak. "Emily, we need to talk about the dog." "I know," Emily replied, sitting down quickly. "And I've been thinking about it. I mean, really thinking. I know it's a big responsibility. I know it wasn't part of the plan. But I can't let him go. I can't." Her father set the paper down and sighed, folding his hands together. "Sweetheart, it's not just about wanting. Taking care of an animal, especially one in his condition, is a serious commitment. Vet bills, food, time, you're finishing high school soon. College is right around the corner." "I understand." Emily nodded, gripping the edge of the table. "But I'm willing to take responsibility. I'll get a part-time job. I'll handle the costs. I'll do everything. You won't have to worry about a thing." Her mother leaned forward slightly, concern lining her face. Emily, we're not saying this. Because we don't care. We do. But, are you sure? This isn't just for a few weeks. This is years. It's a life. Emily swallowed hard but didn't hesitate. I've never been more sure about anything. I don't know how to explain it, but, when I saw him, something clicked. Like it was supposed to happen. Like he's meant to be with me. Silence lingered for a few moments. Her parents exchanged glances again, the same unspoken exchange as before. Finally, her father broke the tension. All right. He said softly. If you're truly serious about this, and you understand what it means, then we'll support you. But, all the responsibilities, Emily. They'll be yours. Relief washed over her, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She blinked quickly, nodding. Thank you. Thank you so much. Her mother sighed, though a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. We can, of course. But this is your decision. We'll help where? Without wasting another second, Emily ran outside, the screen door slamming behind her. The German Shepherd lifted his head as she approached, his eyes immediately finding hers. His tail gave a slow, hopeful wag. Well, buddy, she said, kneeling down and wrapping her arms gently around his neck. Officially part of the family. You're. The dog leaned into her embrace, resting his heavy head on her shoulder. In that moment, Emily felt something shift, an invisible thread tying them together, woven from trust, hope, and an unspoken promise that neither fully understood yet but both deeply felt. The next task was choosing a name. Sitting cross-legged on the grass, Emily stared at him, running through possibilities aloud. Sam. No. Charlie. Doesn't seem right. Bruno. Nah. She trailed off, watching as he lifted his head each time she spoke, tilting it slightly as if trying to understand. Her brother Nathan popped his head out the back door. Casually. He kinda looks like a Max. What about Max? He suggested. Emily looked at the dog. Max. She said softly. His ears perked. Max. What do you think? The German Shepherd stood, walked over, and sat directly in front of her, staring into her eyes. His tail tapped the ground twice. Emily smiled. Max it is. From that moment, it felt as though the name had always belonged to him. Max, simple, strong, fitting. With a name secured, Emily wasted no time creating a plan. She gathered a notebook from her room and scribbled down everything she needed: a proper collar, a sturdy leash, dog food, bowls, a bed, although Max seemed perfectly happy curling up on the old blanket. She also wrote a budget, estimating costs, and began looking at job postings online for after-school shifts. By the afternoon, Emily and her father drove to the nearest pet store. The employee at the counter was a cheerful young man who, upon hearing Max's story, helped them select food tailored for weight gain and recovery, plus a durable collar and leash. Emily picked out a simple blue collar, sturdy but comfortable, and attached a blank name tag to it. Using a marker, she carefully wrote Max on one side and her phone number on the other. Back home, Max allowed her to slip the collar over his head without protest. It seemed like he understood this was more than just an accessory, it was a symbol that he belonged somewhere now. That evening, the family sat on the porch, watching as Max explored the yard with more energy than he'd shown before. His gait was still uneven, but he moved with curiosity, sniffing flowers, examining bushes, and occasionally glancing back at Emily as if to confirm she was still there. Nathan sat cross-legged nearby, sketching Max in his notebook. Quietly. "You did a good thing, Em. He's really cool," he said. Emily smiled, her heart swelling. "Thanks, Nate." As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Max finally settled beside Emily, resting his head on her foot. His breathing was steady, his eyes half closed, but alert. Emily leaned back, gazing at the sky, feeling something she had not felt in a long time, a profound sense of purpose. It was more than rescuing a dog. It was about discovering a connection, an understanding that sometimes, the smallest decisions, like stopping at a flea market, could lead to the most significant changes in life. Inside her mind, a thought began to form, not yet fully realized but growing stronger by the minute. She did not just save Max. Max, in his own quiet way, was saving her too. The following days unfolded with a blend of joy, uncertainty, and a fair share of unexpected challenges. Emily had expected that welcoming Max into her life would require work, but reality quickly showed her that it would be far more demanding than she had imagined. Despite his gentle demeanor and clear intelligence, Max carried invisible scars, ones that did not heal with a simple meal or a warm blanket. The first challenge emerged almost immediately. Max, though obedient and calm around the family, was deeply anxious about unfamiliar sounds and sudden movements. The creak of a door, the distant roar of a motorcycle, or even the clang of a dropped spoon would make his ears flatten, his body tense, and his eyes scan the surroundings, alert and cautious. At night, especially when the wind rustled through the trees or branches tapped against the windows, Max would pace the backyard, unable to settle, his breaths shallow and fast. Emily spent hours sitting beside him on the porch, whispering softly, offering comfort through gentle touches and calm words. Sometimes he responded by curling close to her, his large head resting against her leg, but other times he remained restless, as though fighting battles only he could see. Feeding him also proved more complicated than expected. While he eagerly drank water and accepted treats from Emily's hands, he was oddly hesitant with his food bowl. At first, he sniffed it cautiously, circled it, then walked away. Only when Emily sat beside him, placing a few pieces of kibble in her hand and offering them directly, did he begin to eat. Slowly, meal after meal, Max started trusting that the food was truly his and would not be taken away. House training was less of an issue. Remarkably, Max never had accidents inside the shed or when allowed onto the back porch. This further confirmed Emily's growing suspicion that he had once been someone's well-trained companion. His behaviors hinted at discipline and understanding far beyond what a stray would typically show. However, the emotional barriers were tougher to overcome. Whenever Emily left the house, even briefly to run errands with her mom or attend school, Max would sit by the gate, staring at the road, waiting. On her return, no matter how quietly she tried to open the gate, his ears would twitch, and within seconds, he'd appear, tail wagging weakly, pressing against her legs as though afraid she might vanish again. School became a mental tug-of-war. Emily found herself distracted during classes, her mind wandering back home to checklists of things she needed to do for Max. Her teachers noticed her daydreaming more often but assumed it was simply the stress of her senior year. Only her best friend, Lily, knew the real reason. When Emily showed her a photo of Max lying on his blanket, Lily's face softened instantly. "He's gorgeous," Lily said with a smile. "But he looks sad." "Yeah." Emily nodded. "It's like, He's waiting for something. Or someone. Lily leaned closer. Maybe he's waiting for you to show him this is home now. Emily wanted nothing more than that. But proving it to Max was turning out to be more difficult than she had ever expected. Back at home, Emily also faced tension with her parents. Though they supported her decision, the additional responsibility was noticeable. Her mother often reminded her about the importance of keeping the backyard clean, ensuring Max's water bowl was always full, and managing the added laundry from blankets and towels. Her father was more subtle in his concerns but frequently asked if Emily was keeping up with her schoolwork and college applications. The financial side added another layer of stress. Despite her careful budgeting, the reality of costs quickly piled up: vet bills, medications for his ear infections, the special food designed to help him gain weight, and the supplies she had not initially thought about like flea treatments and sturdy chew toys. Emily applied for a part-time job at a local pet supply store, and to her relief, she was quickly hired to work after school and on weekends. Though this eased the financial strain, it also meant less time at home, which weighed heavily on her heart. Max, too, had his own set of challenges adjusting. One morning, as Emily prepared to leave for school, a distant sound of fireworks, leftovers from a local festival, echoed faintly in the distance. The moment the sound reached Max's ears, his reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He bolted toward the far corner of the yard, tail tucked, eyes wide, and body trembling uncontrollably. Emily ran after him, dropping her backpack onto the grass. "Max, it's okay, it's okay," she repeated over and over, crouching beside him. His breathing was shallow, his entire frame shaking as though the earth itself had betrayed him. It took nearly 15 minutes of whispered reassurance, slow breathing, and soft strokes along his back before he calmed enough to stand again. His trust in her never wavered, but it became painfully clear that Max's past held shadows darker than Emily had initially imagined. Later that day, when she shared the incident with Dr. Ramirez during a follow-up visit, the vet listened attentively, nodding. Fireworks, loud noises, they can trigger traumatic memories, especially in dogs with unknown histories, Dr. Ramirez explained. He may have experienced something frightening tied to loud sounds. You're doing the right thing by being patient with him. But it's going to take time. Despite all of this, there were bright moments that made every struggle worthwhile. Emily noticed that Max began greeting her not just with a wag of his tail but with a full-body stretch, followed by a joyful little bounce that made his back legs lift slightly off the ground, a tiny display of happiness returning to his world. On weekends, Emily started taking him on short walks around the neighborhood. At first, Max was hesitant, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, but gradually he learned to trust that the world beyond the gate was not as threatening as he feared. He sniffed bushes, watched squirrels dart across tree trunks, and even let a neighbor's golden retriever approach him for a polite, if somewhat cautious, nose-to-nose greeting. Neighbors, who had first looked on with skepticism, now waved and smiled when they saw Emily and Max walking together. Some even stopped to ask about him, offering kind words and occasional treats. Slowly, Max was weaving himself into the fabric of the community, just as he had into Emily's life. Evenings became their sacred time. Emily would sit cross-legged on the back porch, sometimes with a textbook open in her lap, other times with her sketchbook, while Max lay with his head resting on her feet, his breathing slow and content. They did not need words to fill the silence between them. The simple presence of one another was enough. Though the road was clearly long and filled with obstacles, Emily understood something vital by The end of that week. The decision she had made at the flea market was not just about saving Max. It was about proving to both of them that broken things could be mended, that trust could be rebuilt, and that love, quiet, patient, unwavering love, was sometimes the strongest force of all. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass and blooming wildflowers. Emily awoke earlier than usual, her mind unusually restless. The sun had barely begun its climb above the horizon when she slipped out of bed, pulled on her jacket, and padded quietly down the stairs. She opened the back door slowly, careful not to wake her parents, and stepped onto the porch. There, as expected, was Max, curled up on his blanket but already awake, ears perked and eyes following her every move. "Morning, buddy," Emily whispered, kneeling beside him and ruffling the fur behind his ears. His tail thumped against the wooden board softly, a gentle acknowledgement of her presence. They sat together for a few quiet minutes, watching the world stir awake. Birds flitted from branch to branch, a distant lawnmower buzzed faintly, and the soft hum of life returned to the small town. But even in that peace, something tugged at Emily's thoughts. A question she had been quietly avoiding since the day she met Max lingered stronger than ever now. Who was he? Really? Where had he come from? What had his life been before their paths crossed? Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edges of his collar, the one she had chosen for him only days earlier. But beneath her fingertips, something shifted slightly under the fur at the base of his neck. A tiny, rigid bump. Emily frowned, gently parting the fur to get a better look. There, embedded just under the skin, was a small, smooth object. Her heart skipped. A microchip. She had remembered that Dr. Ramirez had scanned Max during their first visit and reported nothing detected. But now, feeling the undeniable presence of the chip under her fingers, Emily realized it might have been missed. Perhaps the scanner had failed to pick it up, or perhaps it had shifted deeper beneath the skin over time. "Max, what are you hiding?" she murmured, brushing her fingers gently across it. Determined, Emily stood and whistled for Max to follow. Together, they walked the short distance to her family's garage, where her bicycle waited. She quickly attached the basket on the front, something she normally used for books, and gestured for Max to hop into the back seat of her father's old pickup truck, which was parked beside the garage. Since the visit to the vet was too far for a bike ride, she knew she would have to ask her father to drive them. It took little convincing. Her father, still in his pajamas and sipping his morning coffee, sighed but nodded when she explained. "You really are determined, aren't you?" he chuckled, reaching for the keys. By the time they arrived at the veterinary clinic, the place was just opening. Dr. Ramirez greeted them at the door, slightly surprised to see them so early. "Back so soon?" she asked, offering Max a gentle smile. Emily explained what she had found, her words tumbling out in hurried excitement. The vet listened attentively, then led them into the examination room without hesitation. Max stood patiently on the table, his eyes darting between Emily and Dr. Ramirez as the scanner beeped to life. A few tense seconds passed as Dr. Ramirez methodically moved the device across Max's body. Nothing. Then she shifted the scanner slightly higher, closer to where Emily had felt the bump. Suddenly, a sharp beep. "Well, look at that," Dr. Ramirez murmured, leaning closer to read the numbers flashing on the screen. "We have a match." She scribbled the identification number onto a form and quickly accessed the database from her computer. Emily held her breath, her fingers clenched tightly around Max's leash. Max, sensing the tension, pressed his body closer to her leg, leaning against her for reassurance. A few moments of silent typing followed. Then Dr. Ramirez's brows lifted slightly. "Interesting," she said softly. "This chip is registered, but not here. Not in Oregon." Emily leaned forward. "Where then?" "According to this, his registration is tied to a place in Idaho." The name listed: David Parker. Emily blinked. Idaho was hundreds of miles away. How could Max have ended up here, in this quiet town, so far from home? Dr. Ramirez continued reading. "The file doesn't have much. It looks like the chip was registered nearly 4 years ago. There's a phone number, though. No address listed. Can we call?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ramirez nodded. "I think that would be the right thing to do." She picked up the phone and dialed. Emily's heart pounded with every ring. Max shifted nervously beside her, his ears flicking back and forth. After the fourth ring, a voice answered. An older man, gravelly but warm. "Hello." Dr. Ramirez introduced herself, explained the situation briefly, and then there was a pause. Emily watched her face carefully as it softened, her eyes widening just slightly. Yes, he's here. A young woman found him, yes, she's with me now." Another pause. "Of course. Would you like to speak with her?" Dr. Ramirez handed the phone to Emily. Her fingers trembled as she brought it to her ear. "Hello," she managed. Is he okay?" The man's voice cracked slightly, filled with a mix of hope and fear. You found him?" "Why, yes." Emily stammered. I found him about a week ago. He was at a flea market. Skinny, scared. I brought him home." There was silence on the line, followed by the sound of a shaky breath. "I never thought, after all this time." Emily swallowed hard. Can you tell me about him? What happened?" The man, David Parker, began to speak, his voice growing steadier with each word. He told her about how Max had once been his companion, a loyal partner trained for search and rescue missions. David had retired years ago and Max had been more than just a working dog, he was family. 2 years ago, during a trip to visit relatives in Northern California, a terrible storm had frightened Max. A fence had broken. Max had bolted, lost in a foreign place, and despite weeks of searching, flyers, and online posts, Max had never been found. I thought I'd lost him forever," David admitted, his voice trembling again. "Stopped hoping. But after so long, I wasn't sure anymore. I never." Emily blinked back the sting of tears. She looked down at Max, who sat quietly by her side, watching her with those deep, trusting eyes. He's okay now. I've been taking care of him." David sighed. I don't even know what to say. Thank you doesn't feel like enough." They agreed to exchange phone numbers and promised to stay in contact. David expressed his deep gratitude but made no immediate demands about reclaiming Max. His voice was filled more with relief than anything else. There was an unspoken understanding between them. This was a complicated situation that required more than just a simple decision. As Emily hung up the phone, she felt Max press his head against her knee, as though sensing that something significant had just happened. Dr. Ramirez smiled softly. "Well, it seems Max has a story bigger than either of us expected." Emily nodded slowly, running her fingers through Max's fur. Her mind was swirling with questions, uncertainties, and possibilities. One thing, however, was perfectly clear. No matter what came next, Max was no longer just a dog with a mysterious past. He had a history, a name, and a life that extended far beyond what Emily had ever imagined. And yet, looking into his eyes now, she realized something else just as important. Whatever his past had been, his future was still being written. And she was a part of it. The discovery of Max's microchip lingered in Emily's thoughts like a puzzle with pieces scattered across the floor. As the days passed, her mind played through the conversation with David Parker over and over. A search and rescue dog. Trained. Loyal. Lost for nearly 2 years. How did a dog like Max, who once worked side by side with a professional handler, end up weak, starving, and tied to a folding chair at a flea market hundreds of miles from where he had disappeared? Sitting cross-legged on the wooden floor of her bedroom, Emily scrolled through her phone, staring at the contact saved under the name David Parker. Her thumb hovered over the call button multiple times but never pressed it. A part of her was scared of what the next conversation would mean. Would David want Max back? Did he have the right to ask? But another part of her wanted to understand. To fill in the gaps of Max's life before they met. Max, as always, lay at her feet. His breathing was slow, peaceful, but every so often his ears twitched at the sound of her voice or the quiet buzz of a notification from her phone. He had settled into her home as though he had always been there, but Emily knew that under the surface, questions remained, for both of them. The following Saturday, as the autumn wind swept leaves across the yard, Emily gathered her courage. She sat on the back steps with Max resting his head on her lap and dialed David's number. The phone rang twice before the familiar gravelly voice answered. "Hello." "Hi, Mr. Parker, it's Emily," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Emily, yes, thank you for calling," David replied, a warmth immediately filling his tone. How is he?" "He's doing well. Really well. He's put on some weight. He's calmer. He seems happy." Emily paused, glancing down at Max, whose eyes blinked lazily in the sunlight. "I wanted to know more about him. About his life before." David was quiet for a moment, as if composing his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. "I got Max when he was just a pup. Smartest dog I'd ever seen. He took to training like he was born for it. Worked with me in search and rescue. Floods, earthquakes. Even missing hikers. He was a hero more times than I can count." Emily listened, each word painting a picture of a life filled with purpose and bravery. "But it wasn't just work," David continued. "He was family. After my wife passed, Max kept me going. Always by my side. Loyal in ways only a dog can be. Then, 2 years ago, we were visiting my sister in Northern California. A storm came through. Strong winds knocked down part of the fence. Max spooked. I don't know why, maybe thunder, maybe something else. He bolted. I spent weeks searching. Flyers, phone calls, shelters, nothing. It was like he vanished." David's voice cracked, and he paused to steady himself. "I never stopped looking, not really. But after months, I had to accept maybe he was gone. I never stopped missing him." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of leaves brushing across the porch. "I'm so sorry that happened," Emily said quietly. He's been through a lot. When I found him, he was so thin. Scared. But even then, he was gentle. He trusted me. Slowly. He always was like that. David replied, his voice soft. Anything. Tough, but with a heart bigger than. Do you have any idea how he ended up here? In Oregon? I've wondered that myself. David admitted. I suppose someone found him but didn't check for a chip. Or maybe they did, and didn't care. Could have been passed from place to place. Or maybe he was just trying to find his way home, and got lost even further. Emily's heart ached at the thought of Max wandering for months, maybe years, unsure where home was, but still moving forward, surviving. David cleared his throat. Couldn't. I'm grateful to you, Emily. You saved him. You gave him something I think, we saved each other. She whispered, stroking Max's fur. He shifted, letting out a deep, content sigh. Would it be alright if I came to meet him? David asked after a pause. Unless, well, I just want to see him. To know he's okay. Not to take him, not. Emily hesitated only for a moment. Of course. I think he'd like that. They agreed on a date. David would drive up the following weekend. As Emily hung up, a knot of mixed emotions settled in her chest. Excitement, worry, hope, and a gnawing fear of the unknown. What would Max do when he saw David? Would he remember? Would he want to leave? The week passed in a blur of preparation. Emily told her parents everything, and while they were supportive, they shared her unease. Nathan was particularly curious, asking endless questions about what would happen next. Do you think Max will, freak out? Or maybe he'll jump into the guy's car and forget about us? He asked one evening, sketching Max curled up by the fireplace. I don't know. Emily admitted. I really don't. Max seemed to sense the tension. He followed Emily more closely than ever, his eyes tracking her whenever she moved. At night, he lay beside her bed instead of the usual spot by the door. His breathing was steady, but Emily could feel the subtle weight of his head resting against her ankle, as though anchoring himself to her presence. Finally, the day arrived. The morning was clear but cold, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke from chimneys around the neighborhood. Emily stood on the porch, her hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets, eyes scanning the road. Max sat beside her, tail thumping quietly, oblivious to what was coming. A distant car engine grew louder, and soon a dusty blue pickup truck appeared at the corner, slowing as it approached the house. The driver pulled into the driveway and stepped out. David Parker was a tall man, his frame slightly stooped with age but still strong. His hair was mostly gray, and a trimmed beard framed his lined face. His eyes scanned the yard until they landed on Max. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Max stood, ears forward, body tense. His eyes locked onto the man stepping toward him. Max? David called softly, his voice cracking. Max didn't move at first. Then his ears flicked back, his head tilted slightly, and something shifted in his posture. Recognition. His tail began to wag slowly, then faster. He stepped forward. Then broke into a trot, then a full run. David knelt as Max barreled into him, tail wagging furiously, front paws on David's knees, licking his hands, face, anything he could reach. David wrapped his arms around Max, burying his face in the thick fur, his shoulders shaking. Oh, buddy, oh, Max. I missed you so much. Tears stung Emily's eyes as she watched. Her heart swelled and ached at the same time. She Felt joy, relief, and an unexpected sting of sadness, realizing just how deep Max's history really was. But then something unexpected happened. After several moments, Max turned. He looked back at Emily, tail still wagging, as if checking that she was there, that this reunion didn't mean goodbye. He trotted back to her, pressed his head against her leg, then turned again to nudge David's hand. It was as though Max was saying, "I remember. I love you both." David smiled through his tears, looking at Emily. "Looks like he's found his family, both of us. He remembers, but he remembers you, too." The hours that followed the emotional reunion were filled with a quiet sense of wonder, the kind that happens when life surprises you with moments that feel both fragile and deeply profound. David and Emily sat side by side on the porch, sipping warm tea that Emily's mother had brought out, while Max moved comfortably between them. It was as if the dog understood perfectly that his world now had room for both his past and his present, and neither had to be abandoned. David's eyes often drifted toward Max, watching every movement with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "He looks older," David murmured, his fingers running through Max's fur. "But still strong. Still him." Emily smiled softly. "He's been through a lot. But he's resilient." Nathan sat cross-legged nearby, pretending to sketch but mostly just observing, fascinated by the scene unfolding before him. Emily's parents watched from the kitchen window, sharing occasional glances but giving them space to navigate the emotions flowing freely between the old man and the dog who was once lost to him. As the afternoon stretched on, David shared more stories of Max's past. Tales of mountain rescues where Max had led them to hikers stranded in sudden snowstorms. Times when his nose had found missing children before the sun had set. Moments of heroism that painted a picture of a life with purpose, discipline, and courage. Max listened quietly, his head sometimes tilting at the sound of familiar words or names from long ago. But what struck Emily the most was how seamlessly Max balanced between the two worlds. Whenever David's voice softened into memory, Max would lay his head on David's knee, offering the silent comfort only a dog could give. Yet moments later, he would rise, trot back to Emily, and nudge her hand, as if reassuring her that she was just as much a part of his life now as David had been. When the time came for David to leave, there was no dramatic goodbye. No desperate clinging. Instead, there was an understanding that this wasn't an end but the beginning of something new. David crouched beside Max, holding his face gently between his weathered hands. "You've done good, boy. More than good," David whispered. "Loves you. I can see it. I can feel it. And you've found someone who..." Max wagged his tail softly, leaning into the touch. David stood and turned to Emily. "You're a remarkable young woman. I didn't expect this, any of this. But I'm glad it happened. Max. He's part of your life now. If it's all right, I'd like to visit. Sometimes. Not to take him. Just to see him." Emily nodded, her voice catching slightly. "Of course. Anytime." David smiled, squeezed her shoulder gently, then with one last glance back at Max, climbed into his truck and drove away, the dust from the gravel road rising behind him. As the truck disappeared from view, Emily looked down at Max. "Like you've got two families now." "Well," she murmured. "Looks." Max wagged his tail, then sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if pondering the same thought. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm that felt natural, even comforting. Max settled deeper into life with Emily and her family. His weight improved, the limp in his leg eased with Gentle exercise and care, and the nervous glances that once followed every sudden sound, began to fade. Every morning, Emily woke to find Max waiting by her bedroom door, tail thumping softly against the wood. Together, they shared quiet walks before school, the early light painting the world in soft gold as Max trotted happily by her side, nose twitching with curiosity at every new scent. The neighbors, once wary, now greeted Max with smiles and waves, offering treats from their pockets or stopping to chat. Emily's job at the pet supply store helped cover Max's needs, and her coworkers quickly became enamored with the gentle German Shepherd who sometimes waited patiently by the front counter while she finished her shift. Customers often asked about him, and Emily found herself telling the story of how she met Max more times than she could count. Each time, it felt like telling a small legend, a reminder that unexpected kindness could change lives in ways no one could predict. But it wasn't just about routine. Max revealed sides of himself that continued to surprise Emily. One afternoon, while helping her mother tend the garden, Max suddenly froze, his ears pricking sharply toward the fence. Before Emily could ask what was wrong, he dashed toward the far corner of the yard, barking, a sharp, purposeful sound. Following quickly, Emily found Max circling a small gap beneath the fence where a neighbor's rabbit had escaped. The frightened animal trembled in the grass, cornered but unharmed. Max sat quietly a few feet away, body relaxed but alert, preventing the rabbit from darting away until Emily carefully scooped it up. As she returned the rabbit to the grateful neighbor, Emily realized something profound. Max wasn't just a pet. The instincts, the training, the heart of a working dog, they were still there. Beneath his calm exterior was a creature wired to help, to protect, to serve. That realization deepened the bond between them. Emily began spending more time teaching Max new tricks, reinforcing commands, and offering challenges to engage his brilliant mind. He thrived on it. Simple games like hide and seek with objects, tracking treats placed around the yard, or responding to hand signals brought out a spark in him that made Emily's heart swell with pride. Their bond grew beyond words. Max began anticipating her moods in ways no human ever had. On difficult days when school felt overwhelming or when worries about the future crept into her mind, Max would rest his head on her knee, his warm gaze silently telling her that everything would be all right. In return, Emily learned to read his cues, the slight twitch of his ear when he was alert, the relaxed flop of his tail when he was content, or the subtle whine that meant he wanted more time outside. Nathan became part of this evolving connection, too. Though younger, he quickly learned how to work with Max, and together they devised games that combined Nathan's creativity with Max's intelligence. They built small obstacle courses in the yard using broomsticks, cardboard boxes, and garden chairs. Max navigated them with increasing ease, his eyes shining with joy. Even Emily's parents, who had initially been cautious, grew fully attached. Her father often sat on the porch with Max in the evenings, tossing a ball lazily back and forth, while her mother prepared special treats, homemade biscuits baked with care. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler nights and trees bursting with fiery reds and golds, life settled into something beautiful, something deeply satisfying. Emily often caught herself marveling at how a simple decision, $5 handed over at a flea market, had rewritten the entire course of her life. But beneath the surface of this joy, a quiet thought lingered. Max's past was no longer a mystery. He had been found, reclaimed not by a former life, but by a new one that embraced every part of who he was. And as Emily watched him chase falling leaves across the yard, his tail high, ears perked, and eyes gleaming, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever came Next, they would face it together. Max was no longer the dog nobody wanted. He was a companion, a friend, and a symbol of resilience. More than that, he was family. The wind howled through the trees as dark clouds gathered above, casting an eerie shadow over the small town. The smell of rain lingered heavily in the air, signaling that a storm was on its way. Emily stood by her bedroom window, watching as the branches swayed and leaves scattered across the yard. Max lay at her feet, ears twitching with every gust of wind, his eyes trained on the changing sky. It was the kind of storm that unsettled everyone, the sort that sent neighbors rushing to secure patio furniture and bring pets indoors. Emily's parents moved through the house, closing windows and checking that everything outside was secure. Nathan darted from room to room, helping where he could, though his occasional glances toward the darkening sky revealed his unease. Emily knelt beside Max, running her fingers gently through his fur. "It's just a storm," she whispered, partly to reassure him but mostly to calm herself. But even as she spoke, she noticed the tension in Max's body. His breathing was steady but deeper, his eyes alert and focused. As the first drops of rain began to fall, a sudden loud crack echoed through the air. Emily jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. The sound wasn't thunder, it was something else. A sharp, splintering noise that made the ground beneath her feet tremble slightly. Max sprang to his feet, his entire body rigid, ears forward. Emily rushed to the back door, Max following closely. As soon as she opened it, the full force of the wind hit her, whipping her hair into her face. Her eyes scanned the yard and immediately caught sight of the problem. A large section of the wooden fence that separated their property from the neighbors had collapsed. The fallen boards lay scattered, leaving a wide gap that led straight to the neighboring yard, and beyond that, to the open street. But that wasn't all. Emily's heart dropped when she noticed a flurry of white shapes darting through the hole in the fence. Chickens. The neighbors' chickens. A flock of them, feathers ruffled, wings flapping wildly, scattered in panic as the wind drove them in every direction. "Oh no!" Emily gasped. She knew the neighbors well. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins kept those chickens not just for eggs but as beloved pets. If they wandered into the road in this weather, with visibility dropping and drivers hurrying home before the storm worsened, it could be disastrous. Without thinking, Emily sprinted into the yard. "Max, come," she shouted over the wind. Max was already moving. His ears were back, nose to the ground, tail straight. In an instant, it was as if a switch had flipped. The calm, gentle companion was replaced by something precise and focused, a dog stepping into a role he had once known well. "Round them up, Max," Emily cried, pointing toward the chickens scrambling toward the street. Max lunged into action. With swift, calculated movements, he darted toward the nearest cluster of chickens, circling around them to block their escape. His body moved low to the ground, tail rigid, cutting off paths of retreat. The chickens, sensing his control but not his threat, turned sharply, heading back toward the safety of the yard. Emily ran toward the fallen fence, her shoes slipping slightly in the wet grass. She grabbed a broken board and tried to wedge it back into place to create a temporary barrier, but the wind made it nearly impossible. Nathan appeared at her side moments later, holding another board. "Hold it here," Nathan shouted. Together, they braced the makeshift barrier as best they could. Max was relentless. Every time a chicken bolted toward the wrong direction, he intercepted. Never touching them, never barking aggressively, only moving with absolute precision to guide them where they needed to go. One particularly stubborn hen flapped her wings and darted toward the street. Max lunged, cutting her off with a sharp sideways move that sent her skittering back toward the others. In less than 5 minutes, Max had gathered the entire flock into a tight group near the back porch. He stood guard, panting but alert, his eyes flicking from chicken to chicken as if counting them. The sound of footsteps pounding across the yard pulled Emily's attention. Mr. Jenkins appeared. Breathless, water dripping from his jacket. His eyes widened at the sight of the scene. "Oh my word!" he gasped. "The fence, the chickens." Emily pointed toward Max. He rounded them up. All of them." Mr. Jenkins blinked in disbelief, then turned his gaze to Max. "Well, I'll be." Max wagged his tail once, then sat, his tongue lolling slightly from the exertion. With the help of Mr. Jenkins and Nathan, they managed to secure the temporary barrier enough to prevent further escapes. Mr. Jenkins gathered his chickens, gently guiding them back through the gate into their own coop, which had thankfully remained intact despite the wind. "Emily," Mr. Jenkins said, wiping water from his face. I don't know what to say. If it weren't for Max, they would have been scattered who knows where. Or worse." Emily knelt beside Max, wrapping her arms around his neck, pressing her forehead against his. "He's amazing," she whispered. The rain continued to fall, but the worst of the wind began to die down. As the storm eased, the neighborhood slowly returned to a quiet hum. People stepped outside to assess the damage, fallen branches, scattered trash cans, and the occasional toppled lawn chair, but no serious harm had come to anyone. Back inside, Emily dried Max off with a towel, whispering praise with every stroke. "Incredible, you know that? Absolutely incredible. You're..." Max closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, his breathing finally returning to normal. That evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Emily's parents could not stop talking about what had happened. Her father shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it. The way he moved, like he knew exactly what to do. It's like he was born for it," her mother added, glancing at Max with newfound admiration. Emily smiled, watching as Max dozed beside the fire, his paws twitching slightly in his sleep. "He was," she said softly. "He really was." The following morning, word had spread quickly. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day, offering thanks, bringing treats for Max, and sharing their astonishment at the previous day's events. Even Mrs. Jenkins baked a batch of peanut butter dog biscuits, declaring Max an honorary farm dog. But beyond the praise, something more important had taken root. The community no longer saw Max as just the stray Emily had rescued. He was now a protector, a helper, a dog with a purpose. And for Emily, it solidified something she had always known deep in her heart. Max wasn't just a pet. He wasn't just a rescue. He was a hero. A quiet, unassuming hero with a heart as vast as the sky and a spirit stronger than any storm. The morning after the storm arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the world itself had paused to recover. The sun filtered softly through the damp trees, leaving glistening drops on every leaf and blade of grass. Emily sat on the porch steps, watching Max lounge in a patch of sunlight. His head tilted just enough to soak in the warmth. Her phone buzzed, vibrating against her knee. The screen displayed a name that had quickly become familiar, David Parker. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "Good morning," she greeted, her voice calm but curious. "Morning, Emily," David replied, his tone thoughtful but warm. I've been thinking, about Max. About everything. And I realized, there's more you should know. About him. About where he came from. Emily sat up straighter. I'd like that. Would it be alright if I came by this afternoon? David asked. Easier to explain in person. There are some things, there. Of course. Emily agreed immediately. We'll be here. The hours leading up to David's arrival felt different from their last meeting. This time, the tension was replaced by anticipation, the sense that what was about to be shared would complete a story that until now had only been half told. David's truck pulled into the driveway just after lunch. As he stepped out, Max rose, ears pricked, tail wagging. He trotted over to David, pressing his head into the man's legs in a greeting both familiar and filled with affection. David knelt, running his hands through Max's fur. His eyes soft with memory. I brought something. David said, rising and opening the passenger door of his truck. He pulled out a large, well-worn binder and a small, faded duffel bag. Together, they walked to the porch, settling into the chairs as Max flopped at their feet. David opened the binder, revealing photos, documents, and certificates. One picture showed a younger Max, his coat glossy, sitting proudly beside David, both wearing matching vests, emblazoned with the word Search and Rescue Unit. Another photo showed Max standing on a rocky mountain slope, harness secured, looking out over a vast forest. He was born into a program. David began, his fingers gently tracing the edges of the photo. Specifically bred and trained for search and rescue. His parents were both top-tier working dogs. From the beginning, Max was different. Smarter. More focused. More intuitive. Emily leaned forward, absorbing every word. His training started when he was just 8 weeks old. David continued. Basic obedience at first. Then scent work. Tracking. Area searches. Disaster response. By the time he was 18 months, he was already certified for wilderness search and rescue. David pulled out a certificate, edges curled from age, showing Max's official certification. This wasn't just a job for him. It was his purpose. And let me tell you, he was good. The best I'd ever worked with. He flipped to another photo, this one showing Max beside a collapsed building. After the earthquake in northern Nevada, we were deployed for 2 weeks. Max found 3 survivors, buried under debris where no one else thought to look. Emily felt her throat tighten. That's incredible. David nodded, his gaze distant with memory. He was more than just a working partner. He was my family. After my wife passed, it was just me and Max. We worked together, lived together. Traveled wherever we were needed. He paused, taking a breath before continuing. Then came the day we lost each other. We were visiting my sister, and there was a storm. A bad one. Lightning struck a tree near her property. The noise, the chaos. Max spooked. A section of the fence broke, and before anyone could react, he bolted. David's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. I searched for weeks. Posters, shelters, calls to every agency. Nothing. It was as if he vanished into thin air. Max, as if sensing the emotion in David's voice, lifted his head and rested it against the man's knee. I blamed myself for a long time. David admitted quietly. But life sometimes pulls you in directions you can't fight. I should have done more. Looked longer. David then opened the small duffel bag and pulled out something that made Emily's breath catch, a harness. Faded but sturdy, with Max's name stitched onto the side in thick block letters. This was his. David said, holding it out. It's yours now. Or rather, it's his, again. Emily took the harness with reverence, running her fingers over the fabric, feeling the history woven into every stitch. Thank you, she whispered. David sat back, looking out at the yard. Emily, there's one more thing you should understand. Dogs like Max. They don't forget. The training, the work, the purpose, it stays with them. It's part of who they are. I saw it the moment he rounded up those chickens during the storm. That wasn't luck. That was instinct. Training. Heart. He turned his gaze to her. Max isn't just any dog. He's a working dog at his core. Even if he's retired from official search and rescue, he still needs a job. A purpose. That's what makes him thrive. Emily nodded slowly, understanding settling deep into her bones. Way he watches, listens, helps. Even when no one asks him to. I've seen it. Every day. David smiled. Exactly. And it's clear to me now, you're his purpose. The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. David stayed for the afternoon, sharing more stories, teaching Emily how to work with Max's commands, some of which had been buried under months of survival instincts but returned quickly when asked in the right way. Together, they practiced tracking games, retrieval exercises, and simple drills that left Max panting with joy. When the time came for David to leave, it was no longer with the sadness of goodbye but the warmth of understanding. Max trotted to the edge of the driveway, watching as the truck disappeared down the road, then turned and trotted back to Emily, sitting at her feet with a contented sigh. Emily looked down at him, the harness still in her hands, and smiled. Whispered. We've got work to do. Come on, Max. As they walked toward the backyard, the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows that stretched across the grass. But within those shadows was a sense of clarity, a truth that would shape everything to come. Max's past was no longer a mystery. It was a badge of honor, a testament to resilience, loyalty, and heart. And now, with Emily by his side, his story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The autumn sun filtered softly through the canopy of trees, sending golden shafts of light onto the yard where Max lay sprawled in the grass. Emily sat nearby, watching him with a quiet sense of wonder. It was remarkable how seamlessly he had become part of her life, yet there was always a subtle reminder that he carried an entire history before they ever met. That history was about to step into the present once more. David had called earlier that week. His voice, though steady, carried an emotion that Emily hadn't heard before, a mixture of hesitation and anticipation. He explained that he wanted to visit again, not just for himself, but because someone else had asked. Someone important from Max's past. Her name was Eleanor Parker, David's granddaughter. She had grown up visiting David's ranch and had spent countless summers playing with Max as a puppy, learning how to work with him during his training, and forming her own bond with the dog who had once been more of a sibling than a pet. Eleanor hadn't seen Max since he disappeared, and David explained that it had been a heartbreak that lingered longer than either of them liked to admit. When Emily heard that, something stirred in her chest. The idea of someone else who had once loved Max deeply and lost him felt like both a beautiful and daunting reality. But there was no hesitation in agreeing to the visit. She understood better than anyone how important it was to reconnect threads that time had frayed. The day of the visit arrived crisp and clear. Emily found herself tidying things that didn't need tidying, the already neat porch, the kitchen table, even fluffing the cushions on the swing mat. Max loved curling beneath. Her mother smiled knowingly but said nothing, recognizing the familiar ritual of nervous anticipation. A soft hum of tires on gravel signaled their arrival. Max lifted his head from the grass, ears perking, tail giving a single thump. A blue car pulled into the driveway, and David stepped out first. But it was the young woman who stepped out behind him that immediately drew Max's attention. Eleanor was in her early 20s, with long chestnut hair tied in a braid over her shoulder, her eyes the same warm hazel as David's but brighter, younger. The moment her gaze landed on Max, her breath visibly caught in her chest. Her hands hovered uncertainly at her sides, as if unsure whether to run forward or hold back. Max stood slowly. His tail gave another tentative wag. His eyes fixed on Eleanor, head tilting ever so slightly. "Max?" Eleanor called, her voice cracking at the edges. For a moment, everything was still. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if a floodgate had opened, Max bounded forward, not with the frantic energy of a puppy, but with the purposeful stride of someone recognizing something sacred. He closed the distance in seconds, pressing his head into Eleanor's legs, tail wagging furiously. She sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. "Oh, Max. Oh my God. Max." Her voice trembled, breaking into laughter and sobs all at once. David stood a few steps behind, his arms crossed, a quiet smile on his face, though his eyes shimmered with moisture. Emily stood near the porch, watching, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and something she couldn't quite name, a feeling that was both warm and bittersweet. Max leaned into Eleanor's embrace, licking her hands and nudging her with his nose as if reassuring her that he was real, that he was here. His body language was soft, relaxed but deeply attentive, his tail never stopping its steady rhythm against the ground. Eleanor pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "You were just gone. You disappeared. We didn't know what happened. I missed you so much." Max responded by pressing his forehead against hers, eyes closing briefly as if sharing her words in his own way. The reunion unfolded not in chaos or confusion, but in the quiet beauty of recognition. Of something lost being found, not exactly as it once was, but still whole in all the ways that mattered. After a while, Eleanor stood, wiping her eyes and turning toward Emily. She said, voice still trembling but steadying with each word. "Words. You saved him. Thank you. I don't even have." Emily smiled, stepping forward. "I didn't really save him. I think, we found each other." David chuckled softly. Seems like Max knew exactly where he needed to be. The afternoon passed in gentle waves of conversation, laughter, and quiet reflection. They sat together on the porch while Max dozed between them, his head occasionally lifting whenever someone said his name, as though checking in on the stories being shared. Eleanor told Emily about the summers she'd spent with Max, teaching him to fetch more than just sticks, but tools, supplies, even locating her when she hid among the hay bales during mock search games David would set up for training. She spoke of his stubbornness as a young dog. How he refused to stop until he had completed a task, no matter how challenging. He was always the most determined one. She said, running her fingers through Max's fur. Never quit. Never gave up. Even when everyone else did. Emily shared her own stories in return, the first day at the flea market, the struggles with Max's anxiety, the night of the storm when Max herded the chickens back to safety with precision and care. Eleanor listened with rapt attention, her smile widening with each tale. "It's like, he never stopped being who he was," Eleanor murmured. "Even after everything." David nodded. "A dog like Max. It's not just training. It's who he is. He was born for this." As the sun began to lower, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold, there was a peaceful silence among them. No one felt the need to fill it with words. Max stretched, his paws reaching forward, his tail giving a lazy wag as he rolled onto his side, utterly content. When the time came for David and Eleanor to leave, the goodbye was filled not with sadness, but with the warmth of something restored. Eleanor knelt beside Max one more time, cupping his face in her hands. "You're in good hands now," she whispered. "Wanted. I can see it. You're happy. And that's all I ever." Max nudged her chin gently, then turned toward Emily, trotting back to her side, sitting with his shoulder pressed against her leg. Eleanor stood, smiling. "It's funny. I thought this would be hard. Seeing him again. But it's not. It's right. This is where he belongs now." David agreed, shaking Emily's hand firmly. "Without forgetting the old one. You've given him something precious. A new life." As they drove away, Max sat at the edge of the driveway, watching until the car disappeared down the road. Then, with a satisfied huff, he turned, trotted back to Emily, and leaned into her side. She knelt, wrapping her arms around him, whispering into his fur. "You are so loved, Max. By so many." In that quiet moment, as the breeze rustled through the leaves and the world softened into evening, Emily realized something profound. Max's life was no longer a story of what had been lost. It was a story of what had been found, again and again. Love, family, purpose. And it was a story still being written together. The crispness of late autumn had begun settling over the small town, bringing with it a certain clarity that seemed to mirror the transformations unfolding in Emily's life. The leaves had shifted from fiery reds and deep golds to brittle browns, scattering across the sidewalks and crunching beneath every step. It was in this season of transition that an unexpected conversation would redefine everything, not just for Max, but for Emily and everyone who had come to care about him. David called early one morning, his voice steady yet laced with something different this time, an undertone of resolution. He asked if he could come by that afternoon to discuss something important. Emily agreed without hesitation, though curiosity immediately bloomed in her chest. There was something in his tone, not heavy, not sad, but purposeful. It felt as though he had reached a decision, one that would matter deeply. By the time David's truck rolled into the driveway, Emily was already waiting on the front steps, Max lounging contentedly beside her. The moment David stepped out, Max stood, tail wagging. In his steady, dignified way. He walked over and pressed his head against David's leg, receiving a gentle scratch behind the ears in return. "Hey, buddy," David murmured. "Good to see you." Emily greeted him warmly and led him toward the porch, where they sat as the afternoon sun spilled gold across the yard. Max settled at Emily's feet, content as always to simply be part of the moment. David rested his hands on his knees for a long moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about Max. About everything that's happened. About where he is now, and where he belongs." Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, heart thudding just a bit faster. David continued, his eyes focused on Max but his words directed at Emily. When I lost him, I grieved. Not just for him, but for everything he represented. The years we worked together, the bond we had, it was irreplaceable. And for a long time, I held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd find him. But when that hope faded, I realized something. I wasn't just mourning him. I was mourning a chapter of my life that had closed. His voice softened. But now, seeing him here, seeing him with you, I realized something else. That chapter didn't end the way I thought it did. It transformed. Emily felt her breath catch, unsure where his words were leading but sensing the gravity of them. I've watched him with you. David continued. Watched how he looks at you. How he listens. How he trusts you. It's the same way he once trusted me, and maybe even deeper. Because it's not just about work anymore. It's about love. About family. He glanced at her then, his eyes warm but serious. And that's why I've decided. I want Max to stay with you. Not temporarily. Not as a loan. But permanently. He's yours now, officially. For a moment, Emily couldn't speak. The words hung in the air, so profound, so unexpected, that her mind needed a second to process them fully. You mean it, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded. I mean it. He found his way to you for a reason. And watching you two together, it's clear to me. You're his person now. And he's yours. Tears pricked at the corners of Emily's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were the kind that come from understanding that something beautiful and rare has just been placed into your hands, a gift, a responsibility, and a bond that transcends simple ownership. David smiled, leaning back. I'm not going anywhere. I'd still like to visit. See how the old guy's doing. But I've realized, what matters most is that Max is happy. And there's no question in my mind that he is. Max, as if understanding every word, lifted his head and nudged David's knee affectionately. Before turning and pressing his body against Emily's leg, his tail thumping softly against the wooden boards. Emily wiped at her eyes, laughing through the tears. Even know how to say how much this means. Thank you so much. I don't. You don't have to. David replied, his voice gentle. Way. I can see it. He's already told me. In his. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sharing stories, and planning future visits. David pulled out a small envelope containing Max's official paperwork, his birth certificate, medical records, old training logs, all carefully preserved. He handed them to Emily with a quiet smile. These are yours now, he said. Part of his history. Part of his story. Emily took them with reverence, holding them against her chest for a moment before placing them carefully inside the house. When she returned, Max had sprawled across David's feet, his body completely relaxed, his breathing slow and steady. It was the posture of someone who knew, without doubt, that they were exactly where they were meant to be. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, David stood. Max followed him to the driveway but paused there, looking back at Emily before walking the last few steps. David knelt beside him, running his hands through the fur behind Max's ears. You've got a good life now, buddy, he said quietly. And you've got a job. It's not search and rescue anymore. It's loving her. Taking care of her. being her partner. Max responded with a soft nudge of his nose against David's cheek. Standing, David turned to Emily. "You've got something special here. Never doubt that." "I won't," Emily promised. They hugged, and then David climbed into his truck. Max sat at Emily's side, watching until the vehicle disappeared down the road, then gave a small, satisfied sigh and leaned against her leg. Emily knelt, wrapping her arms around him. Tears that still lingered at the edges of her eyes. "Forever." "Well, Max," she whispered, smiling through the "Looks like it's official now. You're home." Max responded the way he always did, with a soft wag of his tail, a quiet huff, and the simple, steady comfort of his presence. In that moment, as the world faded into the soft glow of evening, there was nothing else that mattered. Just them. Just the unbreakable bond they had forged. And the beautiful, unexpected life they were building together. The air carried the scent of freshly turned soil and wildflowers as the town prepared for something that felt bigger than just another event. It was the culmination of months of quiet growth, silent transformations, and unspoken promises. Emily stood at the edge of the town's open field, her hands gripping a clipboard, her eyes scanning the colorful array of tents being erected, banners fluttering in the morning breeze, and volunteers bustling about with determined smiles. Max sat faithfully at her side, wearing his harness proudly, his tail wagging in steady rhythm as he observed the activity with quiet interest. The idea had started as a simple conversation over dinner one evening. Emily had casually mentioned how her experience with Max had opened her eyes to how many animals in their community needed help, those without homes, without care, or simply overlooked. Her parents had listened, thoughtful but cautious. Nathan had immediately jumped in with wild ideas about a community dog park, adoption fairs, and fundraisers. What began as a fleeting thought soon turned into an unstoppable wave of planning. David was one of the first to offer his support. He visited often now, not as someone checking in, but as a friend, as part of the family. His voice, still rich with experience, had been invaluable in helping navigate logistics, connect with local businesses, and encourage others who shared the same passion. Eleanor had joined as well, bringing her own energy, ideas, and an infectious determination that blended seamlessly with Emily's vision. The result was the town's very first community animal rescue project, a grassroots effort focused on helping abandoned pets, providing resources for families in need, and fostering a deeper bond between humans and animals. And today was the grand opening of its most visible achievement, the Community Pet Park and Rescue Fair. Families began arriving, some with children tugging eagerly at their parents' hands, others with dogs of all shapes and sizes trotting happily beside them. There were booths offering free vaccinations, microchipping services, and adoption stations where volunteers introduced visitors to animals looking for forever homes. Tables lined with homemade treats, toys, and leashes donated by local artisans drew steady crowds. Max quickly became the star of the day. People gathered around to hear his story, how he was found, the journey that had brought him here, and the profound way he had changed not just Emily's life, but inspired an entire community to act. He greeted everyone with the same calm patience that had become his trademark, leaning into hands that reached out to pet him, offering a gentle wag of his tail, and occasionally nuzzling small children who approached with wide-eyed wonder. Emily's parents worked tirelessly at one of the registration booths, while Nathan led a group of younger kids in crafting DIY collars and pet toys. His laughter echoed across the field, his enthusiasm contagious. Even neighbors who had once been skeptical about Emily bringing Max Home now stood proudly, offering their time, their support, and their voices to the cause. As the sun climbed higher, a local band began to play, filling the air with cheerful melodies. David stood beside Emily, both watching as a family was introduced to a young Labrador mix, who had spent months at the local shelter. The connection was instant, the way the little girl dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck, and the way the dog leaned into her without hesitation. Papers were signed shortly after, and cheers erupted from the nearby crowd. "That," David said softly, nodding toward the scene, "is exactly what this is all about." Emily smiled, her heart swelling. "It really is." Eleanor joined them moments later, holding a stack of flyers. "Today," she announced, breathless but beaming. "Applications. We've already had 6 adoptions. And 3 more families are filling out." Max wagged his tail at the sound of her voice, leaning slightly against Emily's leg as if grounding himself in the moment. As the afternoon unfolded, more stories like the Labrador's played out. A shy tabby cat found a home with an elderly couple who had recently lost their own pet. A pair of bonded rabbits captured the hearts of twin brothers who had come to the fair with no intention of adopting but left with smiles stretched from ear to ear. Every successful match felt like another stitch in the fabric of a community coming together for something greater than themselves. In the center of the field stood a newly constructed sign, freshly painted and gleaming under the sunlight. It read, "The Max Community Pet Park, where every life deserves a second chance." Beneath the words was a small plaque that told Max's story, a testament not just to his journey, but to the transformative power of compassion. As the crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony, Emily stepped onto the small stage. Microphone in hand, her heart pounding not with fear but with overwhelming gratitude. "When I first met Max," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat, "he was a dog nobody wanted. Scared. Alone. Lost. I had no idea that bringing him home would change my life. But what I learned is that sometimes, the smallest decision, an act of kindness, a willingness to open your heart, can ripple outward in ways you never imagined." She paused, glancing down at Max, who sat watching her with his usual quiet patience. "Max taught me that no one is truly broken beyond repair. That with love, patience, and trust, anything is possible." And today, looking around this park, at all of you, I know that his story didn't just change me. It changed all of us. Applause swelled through the crowd, and for a moment, Emily closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. When the ceremony ended, families returned to exploring the park. Dogs splashed in the small fountain designed just for them, children laughed as they chased bubbles floating through the air, and volunteers continued their work with the same passion that had carried them to this moment. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything, Emily sat on one of the benches, Max sprawled at her feet. David and Eleanor joined her, each holding cups of lemonade, their expressions content and peaceful. "You know," David said after a while, "when I lost Max, I thought it was the end of something. But looking at all this, I realize now, it was the beginning." Eleanor nodded, glancing at Emily. "You built something beautiful. Something that matters." Emily reached down, running her fingers through Max's fur. "Of us. Together. We built it," she corrected softly. "All." Max lifted his head, resting it on her knee, his eyes half closed in that familiar expression of deep, quiet contentment. Because this wasn't just the story of a girl who rescued a dog. It was the story of a community that learned how to rescue each other. The late afternoon sun dipped gently toward the horizon, casting the sky in hues of amber and soft pink as the town's new community pet park buzzed with the last lingering echoes of the day's celebrations. Emily stood near the edge of the field, watching as the final volunteers gathered loose banners, folded chairs, and carefully stacked empty water bowls. Despite the physical tiredness weighing on her shoulders, her heart felt impossibly light, filled with something deeper than happiness, something closer to peace. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed but still observing the movement around him with quiet satisfaction. His fur glowed in the golden light, and every so often, his tail gave a lazy, contented thump against the grass as if reminding the world that, yes, he was still very much part of it. Families drifted out in small clusters, waving their goodbyes, their laughter mingling with the chirps of evening birds. Children tugged on their parents' sleeves, begging for 5 more minutes, while newly adopted pets trotted alongside their new owners, tails high and ears perked, already sensing that their worlds had changed forever. Emily's parents approached, Nathan skipping slightly ahead, waving 2 cups of lemonade in each hand. Her mother pressed one into Emily's hands while her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did something incredible today," her father said, his voice warm and steady. "It wasn't just me," Emily replied, glancing around at the sea of smiling faces. "It was everyone." Nathan grinned, plopping down on the grass beside Max, who immediately rolled to his side, presenting his belly for scratches. "And mostly Max," Nathan added, laughing as Max's back leg twitched with each belly rub. As the sun continued its slow descent, David and Eleanor joined them, their steps unhurried, faces glowing with the same sense of accomplishment and quiet awe that Emily felt deep within her bones. "Quite a day," David said, settling onto the bench beside Emily's father. "Anything quite like it?" "I don't think I've seen." Eleanor nodded, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Than any of us could have hoped for. It's more than I imagined." "More." For a long moment, they sat together in silence, simply watching. The park, once an empty, forgotten field, now stood as a living testament to what compassion and determination could create. A place where stories of loss could transform into stories of belonging. A place where second chances weren't just possible, they were celebrated. Emily leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, gazing at Max. Murmured softly, her words meant more for him than anyone else. "You started this. You changed everything." Max opened one eye, ears twitching as though he understood every word. "Perhaps he did." His head lifted just enough to press against Emily's knee, the simple, solid presence of him, anchoring her once again in the knowledge that this journey, as winding and unexpected as it had been, was exactly where they both were meant to be. As twilight deepened, fairy lights strung between the trees began to flicker on, casting a soft glow that made the park feel like something out of a dream. More than once, passers-by paused at the large wooden sign bearing Max's name, reading the plaque beneath it, sharing quiet smiles or snapping photos before continuing on their way. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound of laughter from a nearby street, mingled with the soft barking of a dog being walked by its new family. It felt like the heartbeat of the community itself, a rhythm of joy, hope, and connection. David stood, stretching slightly, his hands resting on his hips as he looked around. "I think this is the best ending to Max's story I could have ever hoped for," he said, his voice thick with emotion, but filled with pride. Eleanor chuckled, reaching down to scratch Max behind the ears. "All," she said. "It feels more like the best kind of beginning." I don't think it's an ending yet. Emily smiled, letting the words settle into her heart. She knew Eleanor was right. Life had a way of surprising you, of offering new chapters just when you thought the story was complete. As if on cue, a group of teenagers from the local school approached, carrying clipboards and ideas spilling from their mouths. Plans for future events, pet training workshops, community vet days, educational seminars about responsible pet care. They wanted to help, to grow what had been started. Emily welcomed them with open arms, inviting them to sit and share. The circle expanded. Voices overlapping with laughter, questions, and the kind of eager curiosity that only comes when people believe in something bigger than themselves. Nathan pulled out his sketchbook, beginning to draw the scene unfolding around him. His pencil flew across the paper, capturing Max's noble silhouette against the backdrop of fairy lights and smiling faces. Every line told a story, every shadow a memory. As the night crept in, stars blinked awake in the darkening sky. The last of the tents were packed away, the field returning to its peaceful quiet, save for the lingering presence of what had been built there. What would always remain? Emily stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and whistled softly. Max rose immediately, stretching with a long, lazy groan before trotting to her side, his gaze attentive, his tail swaying. "Ready to go home, buddy?" she asked, reaching down to pat his side. Max responded with a soft huff, his usual blend of contentment and readiness. Together, they walked down the gravel path, their steps steady, side by side. The world ahead was open, unwritten, filled with possibilities. But one thing was certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as a girl and a rescued dog, but as a family bound not by circumstance, but by choice. By love. The park faded behind them, the laughter and memories of the day lingering like a warm echo in the air. And as the stars glowed brighter above, Emily glanced down at Max, his eyes reflecting the night sky, and whispered words that needed no reply. "We found each other. And we always will."